Good evening. My name is John Griffin, and I am leading Pages to Progress. We have Sam Gungaloo here, and we have Dee as well. Unfortunately, we don't have James today, but this is the panel for Pages to Progress. And right now we're going through Eugene Peterson's book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And just a little review, it is covering the Psalms of Ascent, which is a specific set of Psalms that the Israelites would use on their way to their meeting in Jerusalem for their holy days. And each Psalm has a little bit of a different flavor to it. And we've been kind of going through Psalm by Psalm. And today is chapter 11, titled Perseverance, which is apparently a better word than stick-to-itiveness, which is the first word Eugene Peterson uses to start this discussion. So I think let's jump right into it. So a couple of thoughts.
Should we read the psalm?
Yes, we should read the psalm. Sam.
Yep.
You brought it up. Psalm 129.
So this is Eugene Peterson's interpretive how he recollects the psalm. Psalm 129 says this: "They've kicked me around ever since I was young." This is how Israel tells it. They've kicked me around ever since I was young, but they never could keep me down. Their plowmen plowed long furrows up and down my back, but God wouldn't put up with it. He sticks with us. Then God ripped the harness off the evil plowman to shreds. Oh, let all those who hate Zion grovel in humiliation. Let them be like grass in shallow ground that withers before the harvest. Before the farmyard hands can gather it in, the harvesters get in the crop. Before the neighbors have had a chance to call out, congratulations on your wonderful crop. We bless you in God's name. Here we go.
Thank you. So my mom was Canadian, and she was one of 8 farm girls in Saskatchewan. And she was also the first one to ever go to college. She was a nurse, met my dad, and got married, much to the envy of most of her sisters, because she was one of 8, and they were all sisters except for one brother. She made it her mission to make sure her 4 children, which I am the oldest, we're all going to go to college. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And she did as good a job as anyone to let us know as children that we could become anything we wanted. We could do anything we wanted. But there was no question that it would have to come with a lot of hard work. And my dad supported her in that. She was successful in getting us 4 children through college. And I think every person, to some degree, and every family, to some degree, has some history of stick-to-itiveness. I'll also say that every culture, to some degree, has some stick-to-itiveness. And I'm going to ask Sam and Dee, what their impression was. But my impression was that every culture has some stick-to-itiveness to it. I'm American. Sam is British, and one of their well-known British prime ministers was a man named Winston Churchill. And in 1941, gave a short speech back at his alma mater. And in the middle of that speech, this was near the end of the war, he had this famous quote: "Never give in, never give in, never, 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 in nothing, great or small, large or petty. Never give in, except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy." When I was in high school, I found an advertisement in the Wall Street Journal that was a full page with just the first part of this quote: never give in, never give in, never, never, never. And I hung that on the wall over my desk. And that was kind of my motivation once I knew I was wanting to go into medicine, to do my best in high school, to do my best in college. And I think it's a good example of stick-to-itiveness. And it worked for me, it worked for Britain. The bottom of this quote was interesting because it turns out Churchill's mom was an American, and Congress legally made him an American citizen in 1963. So sorry to take that away from you, Sam. But stick-to-itiveness, just that part of it. Eugene Peterson changes it to perseverance, which I think is a little bit more politically correct, probably, for this chapter. But that was kind of my first impression. We're going to get into some details, but Sam, D, what were your first impressions in reading this chapter?
Funny that you mentioned Winston Churchill. Just a fun fact. Well, have you guys ever seen the British symbol of the British bulldog? Have you ever
think so.
linked a British bulldog? So. Yeah. So that comes from Winston Churchill.
Right.
His nickname was the British bulldog. Well, partly because we all say that he looks like one, but outside of that, the British bulldog it kind of represents the fighting spirit of the British people and the British heart, which is what the Brits need, especially during the war, in order to beat the Germans and stuff. So yeah, that was quite historic. That fighter spirit is very present within British culture in the 1940s and the 1950s. My earliest experience of perseverance does come from my parents as an immigrant family who moved from Mauritius to England in their early 20s with nothing. My dad held up 2 or 3 jobs. My mom held up 2 or 3 jobs, and they worked hard to try and make their way through life. I hear stories of my dad who became a nurse in England, experienced racism, left nursing because of all the pressures, and then eventually opened up his own driving school and started his business as a driving instructor, and is still a driving instructor today. And guess who became a driving instructor as well? So I guess I learned the perseverance through my parents. I wonder if it was perseverance, or if I wonder if it was just they had to do what they had to do. There was no option to fail. There was no option to step back, especially when you have children, as John, you shared. Once you had children, your whole perspective on life changes, because you realize you must make a world for them that is better than the world that was made for you. And I think that was definitely the grind that was taught to me from when I was younger. And so I've found that perseverance has followed me into my adulthood through various different challenges. I don't necessarily think I get particularly flustered to the point that I hit rock bottom when things get hard. I'm always figuring out, how can we get around this? What can we do? What resources do we have? And yeah, there is a sense of perseverance that has stuck with me, and I think that ultimately comes from my parents. I am becoming more and more acquainted with the biblical heroes that adopt perseverance. I can't say, if I'm completely honest, I can't say that they are the ones that particularly gave me the inspiration. I have learned about their story, and it's books like this. He talks a little bit about Paul and what that meant to be someone who persevered to those lengths. And those really kind of make things sink in for me on what it takes to be a Christian, not just an attender of Christianity, but an actual Christian. Yeah, those are my thoughts immediately about perseverance. I'll let Dee talk about her experience of perseverance.
Yeah, I think mine is very much similar to Pastor Sam's in that my parents were also immigrants to the States, and they honestly literally gave up everything. And I mean literally, they really did give up everything. I mean, they gave up, their career aspirations. I mean, and their career and their comfort, their status, everything they gave up to come to the States just so that like we can have better opportunities. Uh, you know, and so and I like looking at their life, looking back to it, like I don't know how they did it. I don't I don't know, because you asked me to do the same and I'd be like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I could do it. But it's I think like Pastor Sam said, there was no other choice. Um, and they did it purely obviously out of love for us. And yeah, and that's the perseverance that I grew up with, watching them. But I think in my own life, I didn't have difficulties like that. Like there's because I came here as a child and I grew up, into adulthood, and I'm an American and it's what it is. Um, but I think my experience with perseverance has more to do with faith for me personally than what my parents endured.
And I just
Yeah.
respond because Dee
Yes,
mentioned something.
that was good. Go
Dee
ahead,
mentioned
Sam.
something to me that really kind of resonated. You mentioned that your parents gave up a lot of things like dreams and aspirations. I think that our ability and capacity to persevere is getting less and less as the generations get more and more.
I
Because
think
Dee
it's
just
true.
mentioned something. Dee just mentioned something to me that I resonated with. Could I have gone through what my parents have gone through? I don't think so. I think I'm far too entitled. I think I grew up
Right,
with privileges, and I think
right.
I would say to you that I lived a hard life, and we struggled with money here and there, but in the grand scheme of things, I was a British citizen. As a pastor, I have gone to countless churches where churches want to pray for things, and especially in very diverse immigrant churches, the number one thing that everyone's praying for is pray for my visa, pastor, pray for my visa. Like it's just on everyone's list. And now here I am, pray for my green card, folks, pray for my green card. Like I it's so strange because there are certain privileges that I expect and feel so entitled to, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a step up from my parents never wanted me to stress about the things that they stress for, and in that sense they were successful because of their perseverance. I remember a few friends back in England. I used to go around to their house. These are British people who had their families born and raised in England all their lives from generations back. And I remember going around the house on, I think it was like a Monday afternoon or something it was. I was around their house and their dad was in the conservatory painting and at the backyard. I used to just sit there and just marvel at this guy who would just have the time to paint the backyard. And I'm just like, meanwhile, my dad was out working up until whatever time it was to put food on the table, clothes on our back. And I don't think we take the time to recognize that their perseverance offers privileges for us to persevere in the iteration of our lives. And our kids, when I do have a child, probably will have the same reaction that I have to my parents to me. And I'll probably be one of those parents, you don't know how privileged you are. You don't know what I had to go through. And I think that's when we read this psalm, which depicts the brutality of what the ancient Israelite people had to go through, I don't think we fully understand. I think we resonate with aspects, but like for instance, as Eugene Peterson describes in the chapter, I don't think we understand what it's actually like to have an ox cart pulled across our back with plows digging in, drawing for blood. That's not an image. I totally thought that was metaphorical.
Right.
100%. I never thought that this psalm was talking about something that was potentially real, and I actually looked it up. It's a real torture thing. It's a real thing that they used to do. So yeah, anyway,
And
those
it
are my
reminded
comments.
me of that book we looked at, The Hanging Tree,
Oh yeah, the
which
cross and the
talked
lynching
about
tree.
the American, African American experience
Mhm.
coming out of slavery in America. And, but it was interesting because, I thought it was metaphorical too. It made me think of that book, The Hanging Tree. But then Eugene Peterson almost makes it sound like it was kind of a cartoonish depiction. Not only the plowmen with the plows that God detaches, and so they think they're torturing the Israelites, but they aren't. But also the grass and shallow ground,
Yep.
which he depicts as the plowmen that are really just, they think they're something, and then they're just withering away before anyone even gets a chance to consider them for harvest, let alone harvest them and congratulate them on the good harvest. And so it's interesting because the experience that we have affects our ability to persevere. And Israel as a nation had this experience and this long tradition that was written down. And so I was thinking about this, and it's like Abraham, he persevered by leaving his family and his culture and starting anew at God's command. And then you have, Isaac and Jacob and the 12 sons, one of which is Joseph, who persevered going through all these traumas and then ultimately ends up being the second in command of Egypt. And then you have all of Israel in Egypt for 400 years, and kind of the height of Israel. Well, one of the high points for Israel was leaving Egypt and going to the promised land. And then you have them still getting persecuted by the surrounding nations. And then another high point for Israel is David and Solomon and those kingdoms, which had their problems, but then continued to persevere. And so I think every Israelite kind of had this tradition. And so I think a lot of times the worst thing that happens to you, there's two ways to deal with it. One is to let it get you down, but once you've overcome it, the other is to look back and first remember it. And then I think you can also kind of joke about it. And a lot of ways of doing that is using poetry and or songs. And I was thinking, this is almost a song you could hear people singing in, at the campfires after, while they're in battle, and talking about what happened just recently, but also talking about what happened in their history, because it's talking about getting kicked down, ever since I was young. But then, there were these plowmen, but God, the cornerstone, he says, God wouldn't put up with it, and he sticks with us. So that was kind of the cornerstone for this. And God is the one that detached the harnesses. So those that think they're hurting us aren't hurting us, and they're just going to wither away and go away without even knowing about it. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Was this something that was treated seriously, or was there a component of humor to it? Did anyone else pick up on that, or was it just me?
You want to go, D, or should I?
I don't think I necessarily think it's a humor, but rather a satire. I think.
Okay.
I mean, in that,
it could be.
They're talking about relentless attacks on them, right? Yet they're able to survive and come back. And at the end, what happens is they're actually pointing fingers at the attackers and saying, you guys are the ones who actually are the losers, and that they'll be they will not have the blessings, God's blessings, but that they are continuously receiving that blessing. So
right.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite books, The Great Controversy, Ellen White basically does a historical walkthrough over time of how essentially Christianity survived. And, you know, in the book, she details all the difficult things that have happened, all the martyrs and all the killings and all the attempts that Satan has made through different leaders and what have you to extinguish the faith, extinguish the Bible, extinguish Christianity. And they've all failed. And it's the evidence of that is the billions of people who declare Jesus to be their Lord and Savior today. That's the evidence. It's only increased it. I feel like the satire is found in the irony of every attempt to knock them down has only put fuel in the Christian fire to keep on holding on to Jesus, regardless of whatever troubles and difficulties that they've gone through. Like, to circle back and to talk about my parents' story, we don't have time to talk about all the details, but everything within my mum's story concludes that she should have walked away and not held on to her faith and not called herself a Christian. Like, when she talks about stuff that happened and went down, I'm not so sure that I could have stuck with it in the way that she stuck with it. And there's something in this psalm which, yeah, there's a bit of satire, but there's also a bit of it's almost like, if I was to put this into modern day, I feel like the psalmist is like, you think you have us, you think you're going to break us down, you think you're actually destroying us, but there's something deeper that you can't even touch and you can't even get to where it is. And yeah, he gets a bit angry. There's definitely hostility in this psalmist. He looks at his enemies, and we can talk about that a bit later. But there's something in the nature, call it satire, call it a sense of you haven't got me kind of thing. It's almost like they have an inside knowledge that, yeah, but my experience with God is so much deeper than the physical that you placed on me. And I am learning that with age. Like, the older I am getting, the more I am realizing God's faithfulness in my life, regardless of the circumstances that come my way.
And I think that's exactly what Peterson ends up getting to near the end. He talks about this part. God wouldn't put up with it. He sticks with us. And we're talking about stick-to-itiveness. And as a human being, it's easy to think, and we've talked about our own experience with stick-to-itiveness, and we like to think that that's the important part. But it turns out, right in the middle of the psalm, the important part isn't us, it's God. And that's this last section, which I thought was very solid, because I felt like this chapter, it was kind of like, what direction is he heading? How is this going to end? And then all of a sudden, he titles this section, God sticks with us. And then he talks about basically the covenant relationship God had with Israel was the important part. And there was a good quote here at the bottom of my page, which is 132, but not exactly the same as everyone else's page. But he says the central reality for Christians is the personal, unalterable, persevering commitment God makes to us. So perseverance is not the result. Page 126. Okay. So he says perseverance is not the result of our determination. It is the result of God's faithfulness. And then earlier he said God's righteousness, which implies a relationship with God and then the relationship we have with one another. I thought that was powerful. And then he leads it into discipleship and, what are we supposed to do with it?
Yeah, I thought that was incredibly powerful. I want to add something that kind of leads on to that. And the psalmist, so there's two aspects or approaches to the word perseverance. One could be described as apathy, and the other is, I could describe as hostility. Apathy or evasiveness, or, you know what, forget this, I'm not going to persevere, I give up. And then there is the kind of screw you, enemy kind of attitude. And on page 126 at the top, this is the quote where he talks about both of those spirits. He says, "We are in a similar apprenticeship, but we will not learn it by swallowing our sense of outrage on the one hand, or on the other hand, excusing all wickedness as a neurosis. We will do it by offering up our anger to God, who trains us in creative love." I think the training and the apprenticeship is the allowing God to be persevere. It is granting God the permission to persevere with us. Like he offers his perseverance to us, but we've got to accept it. And I feel like the only way we can fully accept God's perseverance in our lives is by understanding that we're apprenticeships learning to love.
Dee, any comments on that?
You know, reading this section gave me a realization of something that I go through, is that, in really, really difficult times, like I pray to God to like give me strength to persevere, like give me strength to just be able to just hold on to him. And I think reading this section helped me to understand for myself that, yeah, I can still continue to pray that way, but at the same time, I think I should not have this fear that somehow I'm gonna get lost or I'm gonna give up in that process of trying to persevere and hang on. But rather, I think reading this helped me to realize that God is the one who's going to hold on to me. You know?
Yeah, and Eugene Peterson, the very last part, talks about centering your life around God, kind of anchoring your life in faith, kind of helps things to happen outside of you and still have that internal peace that God is in control and God will, get you through this situation. And that's, what he did for Israel. And that's what he does for us as well.
Yeah, this chapter was a definite shift perspective for me. Like I do say that my mom had many reasons to give up, but she persevered. But in contrast, God has too many reasons to give up on me.
Wait, did you say he has too many reasons to give up on you?
Yes. But
Why
he
do you say that?
doesn't.
Because I think it's the opposite.
No, I'm saying
What do you mean?
if we were to go down to every single detail of my life, he has every reason to give up on me, but he doesn't.
Oh, okay.
But I think that's a great analogy. I mean, a mom, there is nothing more fierce than a mother's love.
Right.
And no matter how good your kid is or how bad your kid is, she's going to love her kid and help them get through whatever problems they have.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I mean, the four of us kids had different situations, different problems, but my mom, more than my dad in a lot of ways, was very central to making things happen that needed to happen to get us through those problems. Whether it was supporting one person or getting things turned around for another person. And I think, you basically said it right there. I mean, there is every reason in the world for a mom not to do all of that. And sometimes it's more than obvious, but it's the same for God, except that God's love is infinitely more than even a mother's love. And that's why, I think you can have every reason, and God knows every person has their own reasons and some more than others, but God still loves them all fiercely, just like a mother would or should.
Yep.
Any other thoughts? Sam, Dee?
I think you probably just summed it up
It's an interesting psalm, kind of in the middle of all these psalms, because a lot of the psalms have been psalms of praise, uplifting, and this one is kind of, I mean, the subtitle is "They Never Could Keep Me Down," and it's very much a little bit more of a downer psalm than some of the others.
But it
But I
ends
think there's a
different,
lot to
though.
learn from it.
But
Yeah,
it
it
ends
does.
it ends on the high, because and this is why I think this is what makes the twist. We start with someone who is very bitter about all the things that have happened to them, and we end
Right.
with him saying, "We bless you in God's name." The reason why we can finally come to the realization that we bless God in all of what takes place is because we come to the realization of what he has done for us. And that's
No.
something that I don't often do when hard times come my way. I don't often think about God's faithfulness. I more often think about my inability to move forward.
Right.
And I think the psalmist can end up on a super high note because he shifts to God's faithfulness.
Right.
I think the chapter also made me realize again that our salvation is truly not my doing. I mean, I there's nothing that I can put into it, but rather it's God and his faithfulness that saves me and all of us.
And it's easy to recognize that during good times, but I think this psalm is important in that they're recognizing it in the context of the bad times that can often be there. And, you know, I think just like anyone else, when you're having bad times, you'd often look inward instead of outward, more towards God. And maybe that's what this is, you know, a good reminder of, is that we do need to remember that God is with us and he sticks with us. And that's where we should be blessing God. We bless you in God's name. You know, acknowledge that God is still blessing us during good times as well as bad times. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. This is Pages to Progress, going through Eugene Peterson's A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. This is what my book looks like. It's a little different from the other books because I think it's older. But I appreciate you, Sam and Dee, pitching in. And next week, we will be going to Psalms 130, and it's entitled Hope. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.